Hello, Maurizio. I wanted to show you video 2 here. So we've got the 68030, 16 megs of RAM, passed the test. And now, as you'll see, this is the version 5.2 card. And it should find it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you one disk that has just the operating system on it, which allows it to boot a little quicker. And then I'm going to send you another SD card that has a bunch of apps on it, so you can kind of swap them back and forth. And then if I can get this hard drive to work, I'm going to donate that to the school as well. So with any luck, we should be able to boot clean through. These little 68030s just kind of chug along. And if we get past the reboot complete and it goes to a gray screen, we'll get a spinning beach ball and eventually a login screen, which is what we're looking for. And we're just down to the end, reboot complete. Let's see if it goes gray. And if it is, then my diagnosis was correct. Yep. We've got the mouse cursor up there. We'll get a spinning beach ball in a second. There that goes. And then with any luck, in just a minute, there's the login screen. So that's not too bad. Now I'm going to go ahead and log in. And we'll get the operating system, and then I'll kind of show you the difference in setup here. And then I'm going to move the motherboard and SD over to your actual cube case. And it's saying SCSI disk is unreadable. And that's because I have all of those different partitions there. So while we're at it, I can go ahead, and it should come up about 3 or 4 times. So we'll partition all the different 2 gig partitions here. And what I might do is just go ahead and I may go ahead, now, let's see, it should go ahead and do that. And then it's going to create a 2 gig partition. There's number 2. Yep. And number 3 is going to come up. So you'll see it appear down here. Then it's going to go through and do all the blocks and such. So we'll do initialize there. So what it's doing is setting that little SD card up to think that there's 6 hard drives in here, the way I have the custom XML file configured, which is kind of neat. And with nothing on them, it should still boot fairly quickly. Okay, that's going to be number 4. You'll see them kind of appear down here. Number 5. And as I have the 2 gig partitions already set up, it's going to go through and initialize them within, there it goes. So you'll see it'll kind of do the different block counts. I mean, it's just amazing. You know, we used to have to boot on 7-pound hard drives, and now we're booting on a little SD card. Okay. And just kind of let it do its thing. Talk away here. I want to see if any more panels pop up. That should cover everything. So you can see it's kind of the different super blocks. So it's formatting it for next step, basically. And then on as I say, on an 030 board, the 040s were about 400% faster. And we'll just let that do its thing, and then you're going to see disks appear once they're formatted up in the file viewer. Okay, so to go here, the difference is there is room to add a little connector, and on some early Macs, as well as the early NeXT here, the 68030, you have room to put the it's a floppy connector. It's a 4-pin floppy connector. You can see that I have one on this version 5.2 card. And if you're good with soldering, you can actually add one. The 5.2 card that has one here is working good, so I'm going to go ahead and send it. And I'm going to include this splitter, which is kind of nice. So that plugs in, so you can actually work on the SD card outside the case. And then I've got this hard drive that we're going to try here in a second. And I'm going to move all of this stuff over to your case. And it was used at Purdue University. So kind of neat. I've got that set up in the other room, but I've got my little testing area here. And I just wanted to kind of go through and get everything working for you first. And then we'll move it over to that one and get all that working. It shouldn't take too long. I've got, as I say, we've got new caps on this 68030 motherboard. I've got the RAM working. It's got a new BIOS battery. And now we've got kind of the last piece to the puzzle, a working SD card. And then, I'll show it booting up here on the hard drive. It's easier for me to do like 3 or 4 different videos. I know there's Keynote and stuff like that, and eventually I'll make more professional videos. But it's kind of fun to show the customer, hey, everything's, your cube's actually working before we ship. And I usually, I pack everything very well to prevent damage in shipping. But if there is damage, we can actually use the video as proof that it was all working. So, and down here you'll see it kind of go through. And it goes through when it's initializing. These are all different sectors on, blocks on the little SD card. You can see it kind of blinking away here. So as a result, it is initializing the disk. And I just let it do its thing. I want to see if once it does one of the 2 gig partitions, if it will go ahead and put a disk up on our file viewer, and then it should also appear down in the column as a disk. So the 68030s were the best processor available at the time as well. And this was the first motherboard that was fully integrated. So it was comparable to mainframes at the time. Quite innovative. And they actually had the first fully automated assembly line. And there's quite a good video called The Machine That Built the Machines that shows how far ahead of everyone else NeXT was. So an engineer could even phone in or dial up at the time or on the network, make changes to the motherboard, upload the changed configuration, and it would be changed on the assembly line in real time. So they were that far advanced. And it was, a magnitude more accurate. They were also, because all motherboards were assembled by hand at that time, so using robotics, they were able to, let's just bring a Cube motherboard down here for an example, real quick while she's chugging away in the background, and I can kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So, to me, it kind of looks like a little cityscape, right? And I've often imagined little people running around in here. But Steve Jobs wanted it to look like that. He wanted everything to be aligned and professional. And it turned out pretty cool. So you can see all of these solder joints. This was the first time that they had surface mount technology, and putting, the robot would put in all the chips. So none of this was done by hand. And then it allowed them to integrate. For example, no motherboards up till that time had integrated Ethernet. And so this is a 68040, and it has a BNC and an RJ45 connector. where the original 030s only had the B and C because that's all that was available at the time. You've got a couple serial ports here, and often people mistake that's where you plug in the keyboard and mouse. Well, it plugs into the monitor. And why would NeXT do that? Because they had the first sound card capable of CD quality sound. So they worked with Sony to produce that and then decided to put it in the Sony monitor, which is kind of created an Achilles heel for us all these years later, because any NeXT hardware you have actually has to go through the sound card. We have made some devices that kind of bypass that, but found that once a sound was activated, it would cause the system to freeze. I think it does work okay on the later model ADB boards, not having a sound card and just this little adapter. But the non-ADB actually requires the sound card to be in place. And I'm sure that there might be a way to spoof it, write some code to get around that eventually. But, it is kind of nice to have CD quality sound as well as a microphone, And the original NeXT monitors did not have a microphone built in, but you can plug in a powered mic. You can also plug in powered speakers. And as well as it has RCA jacks. And so a lot of people had their stereos plugged in. There was a product called Digital Ears that used the DSP port, and NeXT had a DSP chip built in, which is quite powerful. So there's applications like oscilloscope. I just found some applications that, are signal testers. So you could, run even a lot of CAD CAM stuff through that DSP port. It was actually more powerful than the 68030 or 68040 chip. It's a 56,001 chip. And one of the coolest examples was the original Daydream box, where he built a little, it was like a little box with ROM chips in it, and you could boot it up as a Macintosh. Now, Simon Schubig, the developer, I got a hold of him and a few years back, and I said, well, do you think you'd be able to rewrite it where we don't have to use the Apple ROM's dongle? And he said he thought about it. He's like, yes, I could do that. And he did it in one night. He still had the original source code. And what was really cool is, so now you can boot your NeXT up as a Macintosh without having to have a special Apple ROM dongle. So you download the Apple ROM, you put it into the operating system, and then you download the app Daydream, which he changed the name to Dark Matter. You click it, it reboots and boots up as a happy Mac. And you can run up to system 8.1, which is amazing. Tons of cool applications. I just found on the Nova CD, which is a freeware shareware CD developed by a longtime customer and friend, Eric Tremblay, that there are a lot of good developer applications in there that I hadn't seen before, as well as documentation and tutorials. And it is for the earlier versions of NeXT, but a lot of it should be transparent over to 3.3 here. And that is available in the nextcomputers.org archive section. We've got lots of ISOs in there. I'd recommend the Peanuts ISOs. It's a 5 CD set of hundreds of NeXT applications. There's Nebula in there as well. And I'm going to load that, a bunch of stuff onto the backup SD card for you, as I say, so you'll have lots of fun stuff to do. It's going to run a little bit better just having the 2 gig, but if you want lots of fun stuff to play with, it'll be available on that secondary SD card. I may just ship with that one in place and then keep this one as your backup. so that when you initially launch it, you'll see lots of fun stuff. I'll put all the original web browsers on there, and uh, games, and all the cool applications as well, like Mathematica. Um, there's Executor, which lets you run old Mac apps without having to reboot up as a Macintosh. I'll put that in there. There'll be Soft PC, which lets you run the Evil Empire's Windows 3.11 and DOS 5.0 software. Um, a lot of cool stuff. And as I've been reading more of the documentation and bulletins from a lot of the users group, which is also on the Nova CD, it was very interesting to read some of the stuff that I'd never heard before about Steve Jobs and his relationships with certain third-party vendors. One in particular, AppSoft, raised quite a kerfuffle. I just read this last night because Steve had made them a sweetheart deal, so to speak, and then sent over a developer from Next that happened to have, he was working with Stone Design at the time, and so he had all the original source code for the new Stone Design apps, which were a direct competition to AppSoft. And AppSoft took over Right Now and some other files. There we go. So there's the first 2 gig disk that's come up, so it automatically mounts it there. And then there'll be several more. So at any rate, it wound up, creating quite a stir because he also secured capital funding for them. And then later on, it was all water under the bridge. Andrew Stone at Stone Design, they called him Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? So he ported all his apps over to Rhapsody, and then to real nice guy, and then over to Mac OS. So, right out of the gates, when Apple and Next merged, or, they say Apple bought Next, but we always considered it a merger. And here you'll see all the disks coming up one after another. So those are all 2 gig partitions. Pretty neat, huh? So once they released the early versions of Rhapsody and then the first version of Mac OS, I think it was 1.0, there was a ton of applications available for it immediately. Now on the Apple side, a lot of the developers were hesitant to move over. So Apple actually had to create, or Apple Next actually created some custom software for them that compared their state of their Mac OS, 9.1 and earlier apps, and gave them a roadmap to porting them over to the new Mac OS X. And for a while, there were kind of a duality. So you could run both applications from the earlier Mac OS and then the Mac OS X apps. And they had a thing called Blue Box, right? And so all your your early apps ran in there. And then as more and more developers got on board to make the transition over to OS X, it became easier. And next step, the shell, because of its portability and scalability, it was easy to port over to different processors. Okay, so Next actually had, the Intel processor port, as well as HPPA RISC and Sun, and they kept that port to Intel in the background. It was codenamed Marklar over at Apple, because at the time, Apple hardware only ran on PowerPC. And, the Motorola PowerPC chips, they didn't have a definitive roadmap to the future. And so that's why you saw, I think it was the G5s, were kind of the last version of Apple hardware that were PowerPC powered. And then they announced, hey, there's, been an Intel port, which existed all along. And they went to the Intel processor. And then, of course, later on, as Apple grew and transitioned and acquired companies, like they bought the Intel Mobile, I think, processor company. And that's where they started doing Apple Silicon, which is, leaps and bounds ahead of everything else in terms of speed, performance, and integration, because you've got pure software and hardware integration. But the granddaddy of it all, to make a long story short, is NeXT. And that was the true gem of the operating system. And as you see, we've got all 5 disks now booted up as 2 gig partitions. So when you go in there, you can actually see them come up, and they're going to have their own little directory here, and you can drag and drop and do everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and log out, and then we're going to transition. I'll try that hard drive. That'll be the next little video, and then we'll move it over to the actual Cube, Maurizio. Really appreciate your business and patience in all this, and I just want it done right, and it'll be useful for students in the coming years to see the original source of not only Mac OS, but also Android OS, right? It's all based on NeXT technology at the core of it, and not many people know that. Have a good day.